Hi, and welcome, everyone. This is Take the Lead, Change the Game, a podcast for women leaders looking to deepen their knowledge and skills and find enjoyment in the process. We're powered by Software Leadership, which is a cohort-based coaching experience designed to fuel courage and ignite impact among women professionals. I'm Lindsay Gray, and this is Mindy Gulati, and we're the co-founders of Safra. Together, we bring a blend of leadership coaching, strategy, and lived experience to help women navigate challenges, seize opportunities, and lead with confidence. Today, we're going to be talking about crafting your elevator pitch. Hi, Mindy.
Hi, Lindsay. Welcome, everyone. We're excited to be with you today. This is a good topic. I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, and we talked about it last week at our breakfast, which is always fun to sort of hear people's thoughts before we hop on the podcast and discuss it with all of you.
Yeah.
So I think we want to first start by crafting your elevator pitch. Like, what is an elevator pitch? Are we selling something? What is it? Mm-hmm. When we talk about elevator pitch, we are talking about when you are out in the world and someone asks you who you are and what you do. What do you say? How do you summarize that? Anything else you want to add, Mindy, about what elevator pitches are, sort of as we're defining them today?
Yeah, I think it's good to everyone to take a step back and think about your elevator pitch, because typically people think about this like when they're new in their career or when they're trying to get a job, but you really need to think about who are you today and what matters to you today. And so, yeah, we always get that question, hi, nice to meet you. What do you do? Mm-hmm. And that's a complicated question, but you should have some ideas of what you want to say. And that's what we're going to guide you through today. But go back, if you haven't in a while thought about your elevator pitch, think about it where you are today and what matters to you today.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a tendency, right, especially if we have sort of like one job and a job title and a job description, mm-hmm. we tend to lead with that. And so maybe we think to ourselves like, oh, this is simple. But as we advance in our careers, and maybe even in the beginning, sometimes we have a singular goal, and sometimes we have a variety of goals based on where we are and who we're talking to. And so really getting clear on like, how do I want to be known in the world? And like, maybe how I want to be known is my job title and my job description. Most of the time, though, we have goals that are different than that. And what we really want to communicate is maybe something else.
Yeah. And I think that's why you should give a little bit of space to think about this, and why we talked about it at the breakfast and today, because it's very easy if someone says, what do you do? And you're like, oh, I'm a lawyer, or I'm I work for this company. Those things are fine, but they don't tell the person who you are. And I do think that people are genuinely interested to know who you are. So I think sometimes we do it like as a formality of like, oh, well, let me just quickly tell them who I am. They don't care. Actually, I do think a lot of people care like who you are. And especially if you can have a good way of communicating that in this concise elevator pitch, a lot of times you can, really get their interest and open up a new relationship of some kind. The one thing that I think is important to think about, and Lindsay, I don't know how often you do this or how you do this, but when you're thinking about your elevator pitch, you should ask yourself, how do I want to be known to the world? And that may seem like a huge question, but that's sort of like a starting point. How do I want to be known to the world? But then the narrow, and this is maybe where we can give some examples, is how do you want to be known in this moment with this group of people, with the people that you're engaging with? And I think that's the key to a good elevator pitch is knowing your audience, having various, thoughts to pull from. But you should start with the big, of like, how do I want to be known? But, if I go to my child's volleyball game, I'm not going to introduce myself of like, hi, my name is Mindy. Like, I own a consulting firm, and I'm not going to give them my resume. I'm like, oh, I'm Carmen's mom. And, and so you do need to know, like, what's the purpose of the meeting? What's the purpose of the networking event? What's the purpose of the introduction? Because you may bring a whole bunch of different aspects of yourself. And I think there's people I've noticed who have a really catchy way of doing it. Sometimes it comes off a little cheesy and maybe too rehearsed, but But I do think you have to say, where am I going today? Like, who am I going to be talking today? And then that can help you start to craft the particulars.
Yeah, I love the mom example, just because like that's such a stark example of our identities being wrapped up in something like totally different than our professional lives. Like, to many people, I am known as Lila and Ellie's mom, and they have actually zero idea what I do. And oftentimes I don't know what they do professionally.
Yeah.
And so really thinking about like, okay, I'm walking into this networking event, or even like I'm walking into a child related event. And like, maybe part of my goal is to meet other parents and to network with other professionals, even though it's a child focused thing. I don't know, but I think we want to do that intentionally. And especially because it's like a zero barrier way entry to like get ourselves out, get who we are out into the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, in terms of like our careers and our professions, like you should network wherever you are. It doesn't mean you're out there giving a sales pitch on the sidelines of a sports game, but you should get to know the people around you. They can be some of your biggest supporters. You could support them. And so I do think there is a way to authentically and genuinely introduce yourself, where you're not just Carmen's mom. You're, hey, this is what I do, and this is how I spend my time. And I tend to, again, think about who I'm talking to, but I definitely tend to try to leave people with something a little bit memorable about what I said. And again, that's all tailored to the audience that I'm talking to. Do you have an idea on like kind of how to kind of start an elevator pitch, or what you should really be thinking of?
I mean, I think, obviously start with, what do you want how do you want to be known? And two ways you can think of that is, what expertise do you want people to be gleaning? And then what value proposition? So like, why does your expertise matter? Or, who could benefit from your expertise? But you can also like start an elevator pitch, depending on how the question is asked, with something funny or like some kind of hook. I mean, for example, as like a women's leadership coach, and I tend to coach a lot of women around my age, I've been doing a lot of thinking about perimenopause and like all the things that come, right? And like the night sweats and things like that. I would 100% never introduce myself that way, like in a law firm or corporate setting, right? Wouldn't be like, well, after my night sweats last night. But depending on who you are, because like for a lot of people, that's going to feel super inauthentic or uncomfortable. But for some of us, it's like a connection point, right? It's like, oh, we're deeply connected. We're experiencing the same things in life. And it's like, just kind of brings down the formality, if that's a goal. But really thinking through, what expertise do you want to be known for, and what value proposition do you offer, I think is a good place to start. What about you, Mindy?
And I think it's great because you only have like a moment to capture someone's attention and to spark that curiosity. Yeah. And what I would say is, like, I do use humor sometimes, but again, humor is very personal, and so
totally
don't replicate somebody else's humor. But I sometimes will say, like, I clean up messes. I can come in and get you ready. But you can hire me now, or you can hire me later. Like I sort of like you can hire me at any time, but it's more fun to get you ready than to clean up the mess. Or sometimes I'll say like, hey, I'm the person you want to be with during the zombie apocalypse, because we'll get through it. And that's what I do in my work. Sometimes if it's a really formal event with a lot of lawyers, I'll say, hi, I'm Mindy. I'm an attorney. I'm a consultant. I help, businesses and law firms navigate culture, leadership, strategy. So I have a little bit more of the formal, but within that, usually after I say that, like, I'm a lawyer, I'm a consultant, I help businesses and law firms navigate culture, leadership, and strategy, I'll say, and sometimes I help you fix those big messes because you didn't do it right the first time. So leave them with a little bit of something to be like, oh, that's interesting. And depending on all of us have a different vibe and a different way of moving. I tend to have like I like to use that, but I like to have a little bit of the swagger of like, I can do some really cool shit for you. And that's sort of the vibe. But again, I really match it. This is sort of learning how to read the room. You got to figure out who's in that room. And also I think I do think it's good to go back to like making friends, because I think it's hard to make friends as you get older in life.
Yeah.
And sometimes I can come off as intimidating or like a lot, like, wow, so I wouldn't give that intro when I'm trying to make a new friend, or or I'm in a group of moms or parents at a birthday party. It's more of a subtle lead into things. And so I think a lot of creating a very good elevator pitches is having a few things on deck, but also reading the room. And one thing I would say, and then I'd love to get your thoughts, Lindsay, is I always ask myself, I always tell myself, like, ask this person something more interesting than just like, what do you do?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just the default. So you're just going to be like, hi, like, what do you do? Where do you work? Or, why are you here at this event? Yeah. But then challenge yourself to ask them something a little bit deeper. So if they say something in their elevator pitch, be like, oh, I've always wondered about what it must be like to be an M&A attorney. Like, do you die in the intricacies of the contract? I mean, and I'm actually genuinely curious, like, how do you survive that? What that does is it allows them to talk a little bit more about themselves, and you inject like the personal, like, actually, I really like you. And I do like to learn about people. I think humans are fascinating. So that's one way you can get people to open up, and it gives you the in to then tell more of your story than just, I'm a lawyer.
Yeah. And one of my favorite questions is, what's your favorite thing that you're currently working on? Mm-hmm. And some people might be like, there's this really cool merger I'm working on. And some people might be like, I'm going to bake cookies on Friday for my kids, and I love like asking good questions. I think is one of the biggest ways that we get, that we like exist in the world and build relationships and build trust and build friendships, as we spark curiosity in ourselves about others, I think oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, that reciprocates as well.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some pitfalls that you see, like when people give an elevator pitch or introduce themselves?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest pitfall that we see is like, we always just default to reciting our job title or our job description, right? Mm-hmm. I'm an attorney, or I'm an immigration attorney, or I'm an M&A attorney, or I do X, Y, and Z. And actually one really cool thing that happened last week at the breakfast is we talked to someone who had, a very sort of like very delineated, clear job title and job description. And then we posed the question like, well, how do you want to be known in the world? And the person was like, well, I want to be known as a connector and more of a community builder. And this person also held like a leadership title, like at a legal organization. And it's like, well, maybe you lead with that, like depending on the circumstance. And it's really neat for people to be like, oh, I didn't think about that. Because again, we have this tendency to lead just with our job title.
And for those who haven't made it out to one of our breakfasts, come out. They're in Austin. Those of you who are in Austin, but it was interesting because we went around the table and asked people, like, give us your elevator pitch. And hers was very like, it was boring, honestly. It was just like, because like no one knows what that is. It's just her title. But then once we asked that question of like, what do you want to be known for? Wow, it like opened up. And so now she can think about like, who does she want to be known for? She'll still include that she's an attorney. She'll probably still include that she works for that organization. But now she's going to hook us into, I'm an attorney who builds community. I'm an attorney who builds bridges across all of these different areas of expertise. Like that's really exciting. So yeah, I think that's a good example.
Yeah. Another thing, sort of reflection on that is, I've talked about the book Likeable Badass a bunch, so apologies for like beating that dead horse. But one of the things that the book talks about is like the majority of like positive narrative about us comes from us. right? Like, and oftentimes people, especially busy people, like will remember that someone said that Lindsay is a badass, but don't remember that it was Lindsay. That's, you know, and so as we talk about ourselves, number one, like, you know, that information that we provide is internalized by others, but also it allows like our other promoters. And, you know, Mindy, I think you and I would consider each other, like we're promoters of each other.
Yeah.
I know how you talk about yourself and I know largely what your current goals are. And so I can then turn around and go out and be like, oh, you should talk to my friend Mindy.
Yeah.
She does blah, 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 you know, and that also like the ripple effect of that is super helpful.
Yeah. And that's why that hook is so important, because you do want other people to go out and say, oh, I know this person. Because I mean, my favorite thing in life is to get other people work and get people clients. And, you know, I love it as an entrepreneur, but it's so much easier when someone has told their story to me and I'm like, oh, I could go sell this all day, every day. If they just tell me their job title, or it's so complicated, I actually don't. Because I will tell you, there are people that I have said, hey, let me know how I can help get you business. And they give me such a complicated, jargony answer that I'm like, I don't really know what you do. Like, I don't even know how to get you business, and I can get anyone business. But so you want to be mindful of that. The other thing, I think a pitfall is in this whole, like just reciting your job title, like people don't highlight their expertise. And I think that as we grow in our career, when you're 20, you don't have a necessary expertise, or 25. So maybe the job title is easier, but as you're in mid-career, you know, you have expertise, whatever it is in. So highlight that. That can also be part of your hook is like, what are you a badass in? Like, what do you know more than, you know, your style or your knowledge? Like, what are you the best at? Like, start talking about that.
Yeah. And I think another part of that is for your value proposition, which I think is something else a pitfall is we tend to leave it out. Make sure that that is, especially as lawyers, which, you know, or if you're in a technical field, make sure that is understandable, similar to the point you just made, to like the world. And so I'll take an example. You know, I was the founder and CEO of a nonprofit organization, and one of our projects was that we represented the sponsors of unaccompanied children, immigrant children, to do like all their paperwork to get a child released to them. So I could say it that way. That is how I could say it. Or I could say, oh, we reunite families. You know, like, and they're very different. And I think especially as those of us in like a high expertise technical field, I found myself, especially with Vicina, as I was like describing us for grant applications and fundraising, so many times like getting very much in the weeds. And it's like, no, like we reunite families or we save lives. Like, you know, and that was something that like took me many years to sort of get comfortable with and really understand.
Yeah. And that, I mean, all of these go together. That value proposition goes to the like highlight your expertise and spark that curiosity with that hook. Because if I meet you for the first time and I'm like, oh, she saves lives or she reunites children, I'll remember that. I won't remember all the other things. And so that's why you want to, you know, have that value proposition, and it ties into the other things we've been talking about, but also it ties into knowing your audience, which we've said is, I think, a common pitfall is not tailoring to your audience. So there are times when you do need to get into the weeds in an introduction because you're with somebody who can understand what you're doing, right?
Yes,
like when I go talk to people who know exactly what I do, I can give them the deeper. Like I can go deeper into the methodologies that my company uses, the way, and they get it. I won't do that with other people, right? I won't do that at a dinner party. Like, and so, you know, think about, you got to have all the aspects, and then you have to be able to read the room, understand what your motivation is in talking to this person. You know, what are some of the goals? And that doesn't mean that you're not authentic. It just means, what am I hoping to accomplish? But I love having who you are, your value, your expertise, your title, your sort of mission boiled down into a couple of words, because it's easy for people then to remember you from that.
Yeah, for sure. And you can pull from different things depending on the situation.
Yeah.
I want to take our last sort of couple minutes and talk about practice because, as you were saying, I think a moment ago, like we definitely don't want things to come off too rehearsed or like inauthentic. It's not having a goal doesn't mean that you're inauthentic, right? It's just more like, what am I trying to accomplish in the time and space that I currently find myself?
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you're headed to an event or you're headed to a meeting or whatever it is, think through it and like say it to a mirror or hop on with a friend. Sometimes you will think you want to say something and then it comes out of your mouth and you're like, oh, that just sounds really weird or just like inauthentic to me or just like, and it may mean that you need to just like say it a few times or refine it. It also may mean you need to like throw it out and sort of figure out a different way to say it.
Yeah.
And then practice as you're going about in space and time. Like this is an iterative process. And as someone, I transitioned out of my CEO role about 15-ish months ago, maybe a little more now. And so like my professional goals have sort of iterated, right, over the past, year plus. And so like my sort of elevator pitch is changing and evolving. And I do a variety of different things in my coaching and consulting. And so, sometimes I'm want to talk about how I help organizations, and sometimes I want to talk about how I help individual leaders.
Yeah.
And so really getting out and practicing, like it's okay to bomb, and you will walk away from a conversation and you will be like, that was awkward.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah, and the last thing, sort of, I'll add, because I agree with all of that, is two things. There's a book called Presence. I don't have the author's name with me right now, but it's called Presence. It's a fantastic book. A lot of it is about like the presence that you bring in these moments. So check that out. But I also think that you should do two things. You should ask friends and colleagues and people who don't even know you well, like, how would you sell me? Like, based on what you know about me, how would you talk about me? And see how they've interpreted your messaging.
Yeah.
And then listen to how other people sell you, right? Like when I first started my consulting firm 10 years ago, I actually would listen to my husband tell his friends about what I do, because it was like interesting to see like how is he positioning it based on what I have positioned it. And I do that still now. Like I've heard, Lindsay, I've heard you talk about me. I've heard, and I'm like, oh, they got it. Like they get what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so that's another thing, is like, get feedback, but also like, look around and say, how are people talking about me? What do they know me for?
Yeah.
And that can help you either continue that messaging if it's great, or refine it. Be like, they've misinterpreted what I do. How I'm conveying this isn't working. And so those are ways you can, have that iterative process, but it's informed by what the perception is of you by other people. So.
Yeah. And I'll add to that, that's on that same note is, we were talking about like, how do you want to be seen in the world? But one of the questions we asked at the breakfast was, what do you want people to be saying when you're not around? Yeah. And so it's similar, like, you have other promoters that like are your cheerleaders and your champions, and they'll go out. But like when people are just in a room talking about the people that they know, like, what do you want the one thing that they say about you to be?
Yeah. And so that's how we all have to figure out what works for us, but you should spend time on this, especially if you are a leader, especially if you're looking to elevate your career, move to different spaces, if you're a business owner, or if you're trying for a promotion. It is really important to think about crafting this elevator pitch and all the sort of nuance and different ideas we've talked about today.
Yeah. And one note on that is, I think there might be people out there that say, oh, I don't need an elevator pitch, or I don't want an elevator pitch because I'm happy in my job and I don't have professional goals right now, or goals that relate to networking. Sometimes we just go to events because we want to connect with other people. It is also okay to lead with that. I mean, Mindy, you mentioned towards the beginning that it's really hard to make friends, when you have young kids in the house and you got a demanding job. Like, it's also okay to say like, oh, I'm here at this networking event because, I just need a minute to breathe and connect with other, lawyers, or with, what I mean? Like whatever it is. And that's okay too.
Yeah. No, and to that point, like I sometimes at certain events, depending on the scenario, I will sometimes be like, yeah, I'm just looking for someone to go on a hike with me, or like anybody like to play pickleball. Like I can't get my kids to do it with me anymore because they will not willingly go anymore with me.
Yeah.
But it's like you can also talk about that stuff. You can just be like, hey, I'm a lawyer, but I also really love hiking. Looking for, do you hike? Do you, and so your elevator pitch can be who you are also, and that's okay. And I think that is the best way to be authentic in this, is know all the different facets of you and bring them in somehow into your pitch.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, thanks for the continued conversation on this. It's definitely something that's been on my mind and that I've been iterating. So I'm really happy to be continuously discussing it.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Yeah. See you next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.